He left her alone on their wedding night. Not because of an emergency. Not because of business. He left because, somewhere across the city, another woman was waiting. And Lenora Whitlock, still in her wedding gown, champagne going flat beside her, didn't know yet that she had married a man who had never once in his life chosen love over leverage. She found the tablet by accident. One message. One sender. One sentence that rewrote everything she thought she knew about the last 2 years of her life. And what Cassian Rourke, real estate magnate, untouchable power broker, and the man who had just promised to love her forever, didn't understand was this. He had handed his most dangerous secret to the one woman on earth, professionally trained to find exactly what people tried to hide. If you've ever trusted someone completely, only to realize the version of them you loved never actually existed, stay with me. Because this story is going to go places you won't see coming. Welcome. If this is your first time here, please subscribe and follow this channel so you never miss a story like this one. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me the city or country where you're watching. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. Lenora Whitlock had spent 30 years learning how to look at broken things without flinching. That was the job, really. Strip away the sentiment, the romance people attached to old paintings, antique frames, crumbling frescoes, and what you were left with was damage assessment. What broke it? When? How far the fracture had traveled beneath the surface before anyone noticed? Whether the piece could hold, or whether everything you were seeing was just elaborate collapse in slow motion. She was good at it. One of the best on the East Coast, if you asked the museums that kept calling her. She didn't say that about herself. She let the work speak. At 52, Lenora had a quiet apartment in Cambridge, a daughter named Marin who called every Sunday from Seattle, and a reputation that had taken her 20 years to rebuild. After her first husband, he'd died young and left her with a 7-year-old and a mortgage that felt like a joke written in someone else's handwriting. She had not remarried. She had not, if she was honest with herself, really tried. There had been people, there had been dinners that went well, and mornings she didn't want to end. But she's had learned slowly. The way you learn things that cost you something, that wanting company, and being ready to trust someone with everything were two very different things. She met Cassian Rourke at a charity auction in the Back Bay, 14 months before the wedding. He was the kind of man who made a room recalibrate slightly when he walked in. Not because he was loud. He wasn't. It was something quieter and more unsettling than that, the way certain people carry authority, not as performance but as fact, the way a room adjusts around them without anyone consciously deciding to. He was tall, silver-haired at the temples, wearing a charcoal suit that had clearly been made for him specifically. He was bidding on a 19th century maritime landscape that Lenora had helped authenticate 6 months earlier. He lost the bid. And then he turned to the woman standing 2 feet away from him and said, without any particular agenda in his voice, was it worth what they paid for it? Lenora looked at him. The painting or the auction house's commission? He had smiled then, a real smile, not the performance smile she would later learn he used at fundraisers and board meetings. Either, both. The painting, yes, she said. The commission, absolutely not. They added 15% this year, and the lighting in this room has been hiding a restoration on the left panel since at least the 1980s. He had stared at her for a second, genuinely surprised. Then he said, I'm Cassian Rourke. I know who you are, Lenora said, because she did. Boston was not that large, and men who built 40-story developments in the seaport and had their photographs in the Globe twice a year were not difficult to recognize. I'm Lenora Whitlock. What do you do? I find out what's wrong with things. He had laughed, actually laughed. And that was the moment she had replayed 100 times afterward, trying to locate exactly where her judgment had failed her. Because the laugh was real. She was almost certain of that even now. Whatever came after, whatever he had built and calculated and concealed in that particular moment, Cassian Rourke had been genuinely delighted. That was the problem with damage. It didn't always announce itself. They had dinner 3 days later. Then again the following week. He was different from what she expected, or from what the newspaper profiles suggested, which amounted to the same thing. He asked questions and then actually listened to the answers. He remembered things she mentioned in passing and brought them up weeks later, naturally, without the performance of having remembered. He showed up to a gallery opening she mentioned and stood beside her for 2 hours, talking about restoration theory with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. He called when he said he would call. He did not treat her schedule as an obstacle. Marin had come to visit in February, 4 months in, and Lenora watched her daughter, Size Cassian, up over dinner at a restaurant in the South End, watched Marin's particular combination of intelligence and protectiveness working behind her eyes, and had braced for the conversation she knew was coming. It came on the walk back to Lenora's apartment, when Cassian had gone to get the car. "He's very smooth," Marin said. "He's not actually," Lenora said. "That's what surprised me, Mom. I mean it. He doesn't perform." Watch men who are performing. They're always slightly ahead of the conversation, setting things up. He's in the conversation. Marin was quiet for a moment. "He looks at you like you're something he's decided to acquire." Lenora had dismissed it at the time. She understood, now standing on the other side of everything, that her daughter had been more right than she had words for, and simultaneously not right in the way he feared. Cassian hadn't looked at Lenora the way he looked at buildings he intended to purchase. He had looked at her the way he looked at things he believed belonged in his world, because they were valuable. The distinction seemed important until you realized that in the end, it produced exactly the same outcome. They were engaged by spring. The wedding was in September small, by Cassian's standards, which meant 80 people at a hotel in the Back Bay, flowers that cost more than Lenora's first car, and a dress she had spent 3 weeks arguing herself into because it felt like too much until the morning she put it on, and decided that too much was exactly what she had earned. Marin stood beside her. Tessa Marlowe, her closest friend for 18 years, stood on the other side, and at one point during the ceremony had squeezed Lenora's hand so hard it left a mark. Lenora didn't mind. The ceremony was beautiful. She knew it was beautiful because she could feel it, not just observe it, and that distinction mattered to her, because she had spent enough years observing her own life from the outside to recognize when she was actually inside a moment. Cassian held her hands during the vows and looked at her with an expression she had no reason to doubt. That was the last, uncomplicated thing she could say about that day. The reception lasted until 10. By 11, they were in the suite, the kind of room that existed in a register of luxury Lenora had never particularly aspired to, where the champagne was already open, and the flowers were probably worth a semester of someone's tuition. She had changed into something simpler. She was tired, in the good way, the bone-deep satisfied way that comes from a day that actually matched what you hoped it would be. Cassian got a call at 11:40. She saw the shift before she heard the words. It was a small thing, the way his jaw set slightly, the way his eyes went to the window instead of to her. She had seen that shift before, in the months they'd been together. Business, something that needed his attention. He pressed his hand to her face, kissed her, and said he was sorry. An issue with one of the development projects. He would be back within 2 hours, 3 at the outside. He told her to rest. She did not go to sleep. She sat with the champagne and the flowers and the particular silence of a room that had been expensive enough that the walls absorbed sound completely. She watched the clock in the way you watch clocks when you're trying not to watch them. Midnight, 12:30, 1. At 1:15, she started moving around the suite just to have something to do with her body. That was when she saw the tablet. It was on the desk near the window, half under a room service menu, its screen dark but not quite asleep. Cassian had been using it before the ceremony. He must have grabbed the wrong bag on his way out, or been moving too fast to notice it. She didn't intend to pick it up. She picked it up. She told herself later that she only picked it up to move it somewhere obvious, so he would see it when he came back. She had no particular suspicion in that moment. She was a woman on her wedding night trying to find something to do with her hands while her husband was inexplicably not there. The screen came alive when she touched it. The message was already visible. It was on the screen, the way things are sometimes left visible when someone leaves in a hurry a conversation open, a message not yet archived. Lenora read it before she fully understood that she was reading it. And once you read something, you cannot unread it. That is a fact of damage. There is no restoration technique in the world that gets you back to the moment before you saw what you saw. The message was from someone named Celeste Arden. "I missed you tonight. I wish you were here instead." Lenora stood very still. She was a woman who had trained herself, over 30 years, to not react to discovery with movement. When you found damage in a painting, a crack that had been painted over, a restoration that had been done badly, and hidden with a layer of varnish, you stopped. You didn't touch anything, you assessed. You located the origin of the fracture before you moved a single instrument. So she stood still. And then, because her hands were already holding the tablet, and the message was already visible, and there was no version of the next 5 minutes in which she could put it down and pretend she hadn't read it, she scrolled up. The conversation stretched back 7 weeks. Not the relationship. The conversation. The relationship, as she reconstructed it from text and tone, and the particular shorthand of two people who knew each other's routines, the relationship stretched back years. 3 at minimum. There were references to hotel stays, to a trip to Lisbon she had never heard about, to an argument in February that had apparently been resolved with enough tenderness to require its own apology note. There was the architecture of an entire life that Cassian Rourke had been maintaining in parallel. Lenora's hands were completely steady. She would think about that later. Not with pride, she had never been the kind of woman who treated her own composure as an accomplishment. She would think about it because it confused her. She was not numb. She could feel everything. The champagne was cold in the glass she wasn't drinking. The flowers were starting to release their particular evening scent. Her wedding dress was hanging behind the bathroom door, and she could feel all of it in the way you feel a room when you understand it's the last time you'll see it as it is. But her hands were steady. She kept reading, and then she found it. She almost passed it. It was buried in an exchange from 6 weeks ago before the wedding, during the final preparations, when Cassian had been managing 2 sets of functions simultaneously and apparently not feeling the strain. The message was from him to Celeste, responding to something Celeste had said about the wedding. Don't worry about it. Lenora is temporary. The marriage gives me legitimacy while the investigation is active. Once the pressure disappears, so does the marriage. Lenora read it twice. Not because she didn't understand it the first time, because she needed to make absolutely sure she was reading exactly what was written, and not some interpretation shaped by hurt. She had learned that from work the instinct to see what you feared instead of what was there. She was careful about that. She was always careful about that. She was reading exactly what was written. She set the tablet down on the desk, carefully. The way she set down instruments in the studio, not gently exactly, but with precision. With the understanding that what you were holding was fragile, and the damage was already done, and there was no point in adding to it with carelessness. She walked to the window. Boston at 2 in the morning was still Boston. The lights on the harbor, the familiar geometry of a skyline she had lived beside for most of her adult life. Somewhere out there, Cassian Rourke was with a woman who had not known or claimed she hadn't known that the man she had loved for 3 years had just married someone else. And somewhere in this hotel, in this suite, wearing clothes bought for a wedding night that had not happened, was a woman who had spent 30 years fixing things other people gave up on. The anger came then. She expected it to be loud. It wasn't. It was cold and quiet and very, very specific. It didn't spread everywhere the way grief does. It had a shape, an edge. Cassian had made one decision that he clearly had not thought through. He had put her name on his accounts. The marriage he had written gives me legitimacy. That meant paper. That meant structure. That meant Lenora's name was attached to pieces of his financial architecture, that he had chosen himself deliberately to make everything look legitimate. He had handed her a key to his house because he thought the house was locked from the inside. He had forgotten that she knew how to read what was underneath the paint. Lenora stood at the window for a long time. She did not cry. She did not call Marin. It was 2 in the morning, and there was nothing her daughter could do from Seattle, and there would be time for that conversation later, when Lenora had something besides shock to offer. She did not call Tessa, though Tessa was the first number that came to her, because Tessa would ask what she needed, and she didn't yet know. What she needed was to think. She was good at that. It was the other thing 30 years had taught her. When Cassian came back at 3:15 in the morning, she was sitting in the chair by the window, with a glass of water she had poured herself because the champagne had gone flat. She was wearing the robe the hotel provided, which was too white and too soft, and felt like something from a different story. Her wedding dress was still behind the bathroom door. He came in quietly, the way people come in when they believe someone is sleeping and they're hoping not to wake them. He saw that she was awake. He crossed the room and kissed the top of her head, which she accepted without turning her face up toward him. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know," she said. "It's handled now." "Good," she said. She was looking at the harbor. He got ready for bed. He didn't notice the tablet. He fell asleep within 20 minutes, with the particular efficiency of men who have clean consciences or no conscience at all. Lenora sat in the chair until his breathing evened out. Then she picked up her phone. She opened her contacts, scrolled to a name she hadn't texted in 3 weeks, and typed a message. "Are you awake?" Tessa responded in 30 seconds. "For you, always." "What happened?" Lenora looked at her husband sleeping in their wedding night hotel bed and typed 4 words. "I need Sabine Mercer." The pauses on the other end lasted less than a minute. "I'll call her in the morning. Where are you?" "Still here," Lenora wrote, "but not for long." She set the phone down in her lap. She looked at the harbor again, at the city that had been her home for more than half her life, at the particular darkness that sits over water before dawn breaks. The crack had already happened. She hadn't caused it. But she was the only one in this room who knew the difference between damage and collapse, and she was going to be very careful from this moment forward about which one she allowed. She did not sleep. She sat in the chair until morning began to press gray light through the window, and she thought about what she knew, and what she would need, and what she was and was not willing to do. She thought about the message, temporary. She turned the word over the way you turn a fragment in your hands to read its grain. She thought about the investigation, whatever investigation it was, that Cassian's marriage was meant to provide cover for. She didn't know the details yet. She knew the shape of it the way she knew the shape of damage before she knew its origin. There was pressure coming from somewhere. Someone had been looking at something, and Cassian had decided that a wife, a respectable, professional, unremarkable wife, would make the right picture. She had been to picture. She sat with that. She was not going to pretend it didn't hurt. She had loved this man, or she had loved the version of him she had been given access to, and she understood now that those were not the same thing, but the love had been real regardless. You could not love a fiction without experiencing something genuine. The feeling was real. The object of it was not. That was a kind of damage she recognized. She had seen it before, in paintings, in other people, in herself, once a long time ago, when her first husband died. And she understood for the first time that you could grieve something that was still technically intact. She knew how to work with that kind of damage. By the time the sun was actually up, by the time Boston was making its ordinary morning sounds, Lenora Whitlock had stopped being the woman who had sat in a wedding night chair, crying with her eyes dry. She had started being something else. She had started being the woman who knew, and she was going to be very deliberate from this point forward about what she did with that. She did not plan revenge. She was not a woman who thought in those terms. What she planned was simpler and more durable. She planned to see exactly what was underneath the paint, to document it carefully, and to make sure that when the structure finally broke as it was already breaking, as the fracture lines she could now see everywhere told her it had been breaking for years, she would not be standing close enough to go down with it. She was a conservator. Her whole life's work was knowing when something could be saved and when it could only be preserved as evidence of what had been. Cassian Rourke, she thought quietly, watching the harbor go gold in the morning light. You have no idea who you married. Sabine Mercer arrived at Tessa's townhouse in Brookline at 7:40 in the morning carrying a canvas tote bag, a thermos of coffee she had made herself because she didn't trust coffee she hadn't made herself, and the particular expression of a woman who had been told enough on the phone to understand that whatever was happening was serious and hadn't been told enough to know exactly how serious. She was 57, compact, with close-cropped gray hair, and reading glasses she kept on a chain around her neck because she was always losing them otherwise. She had spent 22 years as a forensic accountant before going independent, and she had the manner of someone who had sat across from enough lying men in enough depositions to have permanently recalibrated her baseline assumptions about human behavior. Tessa let her in. Tessa had been awake since Lenora's text, which had come at 2:18 in the morning, and she had the particular hollowed-out alertness of someone running on adrenaline and bad decisions about caffeine. She hugged Sabine at the door without saying anything, which told Sabine more than words would have. Lenora was sitting at Tessa's kitchen table. She had taken a car from the hotel at 6, leaving Cassian still asleep, leaving the room service cart and the flat champagne and the wedding flowers going soft at the edges. She had not left a note. There was nothing yet to say that wouldn't be premature, and Lenora did not deal in premature statements. She had taken her overnight bag, her work satchel, and the coat she'd hung by the hotel room door. She had not taken the tablet. She hadn't needed to. She had photographed every relevant screen while Cassian was sleeping. Sabine sat down across from her, set the thermos on the table, looked at Lenora the way a doctor looks at a patient, not with pity, but with the kind of focused attention that precedes a hard conversation. "How much did Tessa tell you?" Lenora asked. "Enough to come at 7 in the morning on a Saturday," Sepson said. "He put my name on his accounts. Several of them. Investment vehicles, at least 2 corporate structures. I don't know what else yet. He did it to make the marriage look legitimate, while a federal investigation is apparently circling something in his business." Sabine did not react visibly. She unscrewed the thermos, poured coffee into the cap, which she used as a cup, and set it down. "How do you know about the investigation?" he told his mistress. The word sat on the table between them. "In writing," Lenora added. "And you have the writing. I have photographs of the writing." Sabine picked up her coffee, drank, set it down. "How long was the mistress?" 3 years minimum, probably longer." "Does she know he married you?" "He told her I was temporary." Sabine was quiet for a moment. Not processing, Lenora could tell the difference between someone processing and someone deciding how honest to be. Sabine was deciding how honest to be. "Lenora," she said finally, "if his name is on federal radar and your name is on his accounts, you have a window. It is not a large window." "How large?" "Days, maybe less depending on how active the investigation is and how much his lawyers already know. The moment someone looks at account structures and sees your name, they will want to talk to you. If you haven't moved first, you will spend the next 2 years explaining yourself from a defensive position." Tessa, standing at the counter with her own coffee, said quietly, "What does moving first look like?" Sabine looked at Lenora, not Tessa. "It means we go through everything he gave her access to before anyone thinks to lock it. It means we document what's hers, separate it cleanly, and build a paper trail that shows she acted independently and immediately upon discovery." "I'm not taking his money," Lenora said. "I'm not suggesting you take his money. I'm suggesting you take yours." The distinction was small and enormous simultaneously, and all 3 women in the room understood that. Lenora said, "How do we start?" Sabine reached into the canvas tote and pulled out a laptop. "You tell me everything he told you, every account he mentioned, every document he had you sign. And I mean everything, including things you thought were routine, especially things you thought were routine." They worked for 4 hours without stopping. Lenora's memory was good. She had spent decades cataloging details in her professional life, and the habit had no off switch. She remembered account numbers because she had a mind that retained sequences. She remembered the name of the investment vehicle because she had asked Cassian what it meant, and he had explained it in the patient, slightly simplifying way. He explained financial things to her, which she had accepted without suspicion because she had trusted him completely. She remembered the 2 corporate structures because she had signed documents for both within a month of the engagement and had asked a single question about each one and received a single answer that satisfied her at the time. Sabine typed steadily. She asked precise questions. She did not editorialize. At 11, she looked up from the screen and said, "He made a significant error. Tell me." "The second corporate structure, the one he had you sign on to in July, it's a holding entity. He probably thought it was clean enough. But it's connected through a subsidiary to a set of accounts that have had federal attention since at least last spring." She paused. "Lenora, this isn't just infidelity. His financial architecture has exposure that a divorce attorney is not going to be able to manage." The word divorce landed in the room like something physical. "I know," Lenora said. "You're going to need someone who handles federal disclosure, not just family law. I know that too." Tessa set down her cup. "Then we find that person." "We find that person," Lenora agreed. "But first I need to know what's actually there. All of it. Because I'm not going back into that hotel and sitting across from him at dinner, tonight not knowing what I'm dealing with. Sabine looked at her steadily. You're going back? For now. Lenora's voice was even. Not cold, that was the thing that surprised her about herself. Even now, she was not operating from coldness. She was operating from something more controlled than that. If I disappear today, he knows I found something. If I stay and act normal for a few days, I have time. We have time. Sabine said nothing for a moment. Then, that's going to cost you something. I know what it's going to cost me. She went back. She told Cassian she had needed air, that the city in the early morning had called to her, that she had walked and had coffee with Tessa, who had texted while he was asleep. He accepted this without visible skepticism either, because he believed her or because the version of Lenora he had married was not a woman he was monitoring closely. He kissed her. He apologized again for the previous night. He suggested they have a late breakfast. They had breakfast. Lenora sat across from her husband of less than 24 hours and ate eggs and drank real coffee and listened to him. Talk about an architect he was considering for a project in the seaport. And she asked questions in the right places, and she watched his face with the particular trained attention of someone who had spent 30 years studying what was underneath. He was good. She gave him that. The warmth was not entirely performance. She had not been wrong about the laugh, about the attention, about the way he listened. Those things were real. They existed alongside everything else. That was the hardest part to hold, and she held it anyway, because the truth was more useful to her than a simpler story. She had 5 days. That was what Sabine estimated. 5 days before account activity or legal movement might alert someone to look more carefully. She used them. The shape of her days bent into something that would have looked, from outside, like a woman, settling into married life. She accompanied Cassian to a dinner at a colleague's home in Beacon Hill. She stood beside him at a gallery opening in the South End and talked to the right people and accepted compliments about the wedding. She came home to the hotel suite. They were staying there through the end of the month before moving to Cassian's house in Brookline, and she was composed and warm and present in all the ways he expected. Before 5 every morning, she was at Tessa's. Sabine was always there first. The picture that assembled itself over those 5 days was not what Lenora had expected, which was bad. She had expected bad. What she got was worse, and more complex, and strangely colder in its construction than simple greed. Cassian's shadow network, that was how Sabine described it, without drama, the way you describe a topographical feature, had been running parallel to his legitimate empire for at least a decade. Shell companies, political relationships that had a different character on paper than they did in practice. Financial transfers that moved through enough layers to be untraceable by anyone who wasn't looking specifically for them. The federal attention wasn't new. It had been building for 18 months, which meant Cassian had known. It was building, which meant the timeline of his marriage proposal to Lenora lined up with the escalation of that attention in a way that was not a coincidence. She had been selected. The word turned in her like a key, not romanced, not chosen, selected for respectability, for surface, for the particular credibility that a serious professional woman attached to a man's life when she agreed to share it. Sabine said it plainly one morning, without apology, because that was who Sabine was. You were a legitimacy acquisition. He identified what he needed and identified someone who provided it. Tessa said from the corner, I want to say something very profane right now. Go ahead, Sabine said. She did. Lenora said nothing. She was looking at the transfer records on Sabine's screen. A particular date was circling in her mind, the date of their third dinner, which she had thought of for a year, as the dinner where she had understood this was serious, where she had let herself believe something was beginning. She checked it against the timeline on the screen. That dinner was 3 days after the first significant federal inquiry into one of Cassian's subsidiary companies. She had been part of his response strategy within weeks of their first conversation. Lenora, Tessa said quietly. I'm fine, Lenora said. You don't have to be fine. I know that. I'm choosing to be functional right now and fall apart later. She turned to Sabine. What do I actually have legal access to? Sabine pulled up a separate document. More than he intended, because the structure he used was sloppy at the edges. He was in a hurry when he set this up. You can see it in the document dates. 3 of the accounts, including the investment vehicle, show you as a joint account holder with full transaction authority. The two corporate structures are more complex, but your signature on them gives you standing to request records. And the assets that are specifically and unambiguously mine, the amounts he transferred directly to you as wedding gifts, his words in the transfer notes, which is ironically useful for your purposes. A brokerage account he opened in your name. And whatever you brought into the marriage yourself. I want only what's mine, Lenora said, not a dollar more. I understand. But I want every dollar of mine protected before he or anyone else can freeze anything. Sabine nodded once. That I can do. It was on the fourth morning that Bennett Shaw appeared. She had known about Bennett the way you know about weather systems on the periphery he was. Always present in Cassian's world, always near, with the particular quality of a man who had made himself so necessary over so long that he had become part of the architecture rather than someone distinct from it. He was 61, lean and quiet, with a face that had been handsome once and was now simply watchful. He had worked with Cassian for nearly 20 years. He knew the company, the way a surgeon knows of a body from the inside out. He stopped her in the lobby of the hotel on a Tuesday morning. She had been heading to Tessa's. She had 45 minutes before Cassian would expect her back with coffee and whatever breakfast she picked up at the place. On Newberry he liked. Bennett said, "Good morning, Lenora." She said, "Good morning, Bennett. You're up early." "I'm always up early. Occupational habit." She smiled at him, the precise degree of warmth appropriate for a woman, speaking to her new husband's trusted associate. Old paintings don't care about business hours. Bennett smiled back. His smile was the kind of smile that contained more observation than warmth. Cassian says, "You've been settling in well. We're getting there. Marriage takes adjustment." He paused just a beat, just enough, especially when you're learning someone's whole life all at once. She met his eyes. "Cassian's been very patient with me." "He would be," Bennett said. There was something in the cadence of it that wasn't quite a statement and wasn't quite a question. "He's good at patience when he wants something to last." She did not change her expression. "I should get his coffee. He's picky about the temperature." Bennett stepped slightly aside. "Of course." She walked out. In the car, she sat for 30 seconds without starting it. Bennett knew something. She didn't know what, and she didn't know how much, and she didn't know which direction the knowing pointed. He could be Cassian's watchdog, sent to assess what she was doing with her early mornings. He could be operating from his own calculations, or he could simply be a man who had watched Cassian for 20 years and recognized a situation developing. She filed it and drove to Tessa's. She told Sabine. Sabine listened without expression. "Has he done anything concrete?" "No." It was a conversation in a lobby. "Then it's a data point." Sabine wrote something down. "But you should know in the financial architecture we've been mapping, Bennett's name appears on several of the same documents yours does. He's been embedded in these structures for longer than you have. What does that mean for us?" "It means he's either completely loyal to Cassian, or he's had plenty of time to build his own position relative to Cassian. Those are very different things. Which do you think it is?" Sabine paused. "Just slightly. 20 years in a criminal-adjacent structure, and the man is still standing, still trusted, still present. Either he's genuinely loyal or he's been building something slowly enough that nobody's noticed." She looked at Lenora over her glasses. "In my experience, patient men are rarely loyal for its own sake. They're loyal until they aren't." That evening, Celeste Arden contacted her. The message came through a secondary channel, an email to an address Lenora had used briefly for consulting work and had almost forgotten about. She did not know how Celeste had found it. The message was 7 lines. It said, "I know this is the last thing you want to hear from me. I need you to know. I didn't know he had actually gone through with marrying you. He told me you were someone he had a history with and that you understood the arrangement. He told me you had an understanding." Those were his exact words. "I am not asking you for anything. I am telling you this because I would want to know if our positions were reversed. What he said about you in his messages, I only saw part of what he wrote. But whatever I saw, I'm sorry. You deserve to know you were being lied to. We both did." Lenora read it twice. Sent it to Sabine without comment. Sabine called her 20 minutes later. "You think she's telling the truth?" "I think she's telling her version of the truth, which is that she was lied to differently than I was, and that she's been trying to make that distinction before I make it for her." Lenora paused. "I don't know yet if it matters. It might matter legally. I know. Are you going to respond? She looked out the window of the hotel suite. Cassian was showering. She could hear the water. Not yet. What she had not told Sabine, what she had not yet said out loud to anyone, not even Tessa, was what she had felt, reading Celeste's message. Which was not rage, not the clean, satisfying anger she might have wished for. What she felt was something stranger and more difficult, the particular exhaustion of recognizing that two women who had every reason to hate each other had been maneuvered into that position by a man who had sorted them both into the same column on his ledger. Useful, until inconvenient. It didn't make Celeste innocent. It didn't make the 3 years of messages disappear. But it changed the shape of the thing. And Lenora was a woman who believed in accurate shapes even when they were inconvenient. She had been selected. Celeste had been managed. And somewhere in between those two facts was the real picture of what Cassian Rourke had been doing, with the people he claimed to love. On the 5th morning, Sabine finished the document mapping. She spread it on Tessa's kitchen table, actual paper, printed, because Sabine was a woman who trusted paper over screens for final review, and the three of them stood over it in the early morning, quiet. It was 14 pages. It documented Lenora's name, her legal access, her assets, and the boundaries of her exposure. It documented the transfers Sabine had processed, the assets belonging to Lenora, moved into protected accounts with a paper trail, clear enough to be followed by anyone who wanted to follow it. It included a carefully organized summary of the financial records Lenora had accessed through her account holder standing, documenting what existed without removing or altering anything. This, Sabine said, is what you provide to a federal attorney and a family attorney on the same day. Simultaneously, they need to know about each other. They need to see the same thing. And the evidence? Sabine opened a separate folder. Inside, it was a drive. I have a contact. Former federal investigator, private practice now. She does compliance consulting. Her name is Harper Sloan. Lenora looked at the drive. She receives a curated portion, Sabine said. Enough to establish a pattern. Enough to be useful. Not so much that it looks like we had access to more than your account holder rights would explain. Curated how? By me with a lawyer reviewing it before it goes anywhere. Sabine met Lenora's eyes. I need your authorization to proceed. The kitchen was very quiet. Tessa was not looking at her. She was looking at the table, giving Lenora the space to make this decision without the weight of being watched. Lenora thought about the morning after her wedding. The window and the harbor and the knowledge settling into her like something cold and permanent. She thought about Cassian's face during the vows, the expression she had read as real and still believed had been, in some compartment of him, real. She thought about the message. Temporary? She thought about Marin, who had said looks at you like something he's decided to acquire, and had been right and wrong simultaneously. She thought about the thing Cassian had gotten wrong. He had assumed that her steadiness under pressure was the same as his, that her composure was the same animal as his calculation. He had looked at a woman who had survived widowhood and rebuilding, and 20 years of putting her professional reputation back together from the ground up. And he had seen someone who would be useful, someone who would make a convincing picture, someone who would not cause problems. He had not seen a woman who had spent 30 years learning how to identify the exact location of a fracture before she touched anything. She said, proceed. Sabine nodded, picked up her phone, sent a single text. Tessa finally looked up, and something in her face broke open slightly, not relief exactly, but the expression of a woman who had been holding something tightly and could now set it down by 1 degree. Okay, Tessa said softly. Not done yet, Lenora said. I know. Tessa picked up her coffee. But you're the one who decides how this ends. Not him. Lenora picked up her own cup. It had gone cold while they worked, and she drank it anyway, the way you drink cold coffee when you don't have time to make more. She had one more day inside this marriage before she moved, and somewhere in the financial architecture, she had just authorized Sabine to begin mapping for external eyes, somewhere in the shell companies and the subsidiary connections, and the 18 months of federal attention, somewhere in all of that. A man named Bennett Shaw had spent nearly 20 years building something of his own. She didn't know that yet. She would. That evening, she sat across from Cassian at dinner in a restaurant she had loved for years, the kind of place that knew her order and brought bread without asking and felt, until 6 days ago, like something that belonged to her life specifically. Cassian was in good spirits. He reached across the table and took her hand, and his hand was warm, and his grip was the grip she had trusted, and she let him hold it. She looked at him. He looked back. Somewhere in the structure of that look, in the genuine warmth she still believed was real in him, alongside everything else, that was she made the last calculation she needed to make. She was not going to wait any longer. Tomorrow morning, before he woke, she would finish what she had started on her wedding night. She would pack one bag. She would leave him a ring and 4 words. And she would walk out of this restaurant, this hotel, this life she had been invited into as a prop, and she would begin the part of this that belonged entirely to. She packed in 11 minutes. She had timed it once in her head, during one of the early mornings at Tessa's, when Sabine was running numbers, and Lenora had nothing to do but sit and think and plan. 11 minutes for one bag, done right, the things that mattered, nothing that could be replaced. Her work satchel with the documentation copies, her laptop, the small leather case with her mother's earrings that she had worn to the wedding and would never wear again for reasons that had nothing to do with the earrings themselves. 2 changes of clothes, her passport, which she had begun keeping in her satchel rather than in the hotel safe after the 3rd day, a habit shift so small Cassian had never noticed. He was still asleep. She had watched his breathing for 30 seconds from the doorway of the bedroom to confirm it, the deep, even rhythm of a man with no activated conscience, a man whose sleep was not troubled by what he had built or what he had used. She had felt something watching him. Not love anymore, not exactly, but the ghost of it, which is its own particular weight. You don't stop feeling the shape of something just because you've learned what it actually was. She let herself feel it for those 30 seconds. Then she went to the desk. The ring was a cushion-cut diamond in a platinum setting that Cassian had presented to her in the public garden on an evening in April when the cherry trees were doing what cherry trees do in April. And the whole scene had been so exactly what a proposal was supposed to look like that she had said yes before she'd finished thinking. She had loved the ring. She was aware of loving it, even now. And she was aware that the love was for what she had believed the ring represented and not for the object itself. And she set it inside the small hotel envelope with the steadiness she had promised herself. She wrote the 4 words on the notepad. The hotel provided the heavy cream paper with the embossed letterhead that cost more per sheet than most people's lunch. I know. Good luck. She set the envelopes aside the ring box. She looked at the arrangement for a moment. It was precise. It communicated exactly what she intended it to communicate, and nothing more. Cassian would understand it immediately. He was not a man who required things spelled out, and the understanding would hit him with the particular force of a message that has no opening for negotiation. She picked up her bag. She walked out of the suite without looking back, which was a decision she made deliberately because she knew herself well enough to know that looking back was a risk she didn't need to take. The elevator was empty. The lobby at 4:50 in the morning had the quality of a space between things, a security guard at the far desk, a single overnight staffer behind the front counter, the kind of low ambient lighting that exists, to suggest the building is resting. No one looked at her with particular attention. A woman in a good coat with a single bag and the expression of someone who knows where she's going is not a woman anyone stops. Tessa's rental car was at the curb on Exeter Street. Lenora got in. Tessa looked at her once, then looked forward and pulled into the empty street without saying anything, because Tessa was a woman who understood which moments required words and which required the mercy of silence. They drove. The city at 5 in the morning was a different city, the bones of it visible, in a way that the daytime crowds obscured, the actual architecture of streets and bridges and water presenting itself without the interference of ordinary life. Lenora watched it go past the window and felt the particular sensation of leaving something large, the inner recalibration that happens when you remove yourself from a structure you've been part of for a long time. It wasn't relief. It was bigger and less comfortable than relief. It was the feeling of a weight shifting, not disappearing, redistributing itself into a shape she didn't fully know yet. The flight's at 8:15, Tessa said. I know. Sabine says the transfer's completed at midnight. I know that too. Tessa drove. Then, after a minute, are you okay? Ask me in Florence. Tessa nodded and didn't ask again. They were on the expressway when Lenora's phone lit up. She looked at the screen, expecting Sabine, expecting a confirmation, expecting the ordinary logistical communication of people managing a complicated exit. What she got instead was a number she didn't recognize, a Boston area code, nothing stored in her contacts, calling at 5:14 in the morning. She stared at it for 3 rings. "Don't answer unknown numbers right now," Tessa said, not looking away from the road. Lenora answered it. "Mrs. Rourke." The voice was male, level, entirely awake for 5 in the morning. "My name is Bennett Shaw. I think you already know who I am." The insides of the car went very still. Tessa's hands tightened on the wheel by a fraction. Lenora saw it from the corner of her eye. "I know who you are," Lenora said. "Good. That saves time." A pause that was not hesitation but calculation. "You're in a car right now. You've been at this hotel." He named a cross street 2 blocks from Tessa's townhouse in Brookline. "Every morning for 5 days, usually arriving between 5 and 5:30, leaving by 6:45. The cold moved through her fast, starting at the base of her throat. "What do you want, Bennett?" "To talk. Not on behalf of Cassian. On behalf of myself." Another pause. "I know what you found on his tablet. I know what you and your accountant have been building. And I know you're on your way to the airport right now." Tessa had her eyes fixed on the road, but her jaw was set in a way Lenora recognized as contained panic. "How?" Lenora said. "Because I've been watching Cassian's accounts for 18 months, Bennett said. And when a new name appears on 3 of them and starts accessing records within 72 hours of a wedding, it becomes interesting." He paused. "You're good, Lenora. Genuinely. But you were working in a house I helped build, and I know where every room is." She said nothing. She was thinking fast, the way she thought fast, when she picked up a painting and saw something unexpected in the ground layer. The immediate inventory of what she knew, what she didn't know, and what she needed to know before she moved. "What do you want?" she said again. And this time it wasn't a question so much as a demand for specificity. "I want to offer you something," Bennett said. "A coordination. Your evidence with mine. What you have from the account access, combined with what I've been compiling for 18 months together, it's substantially more complete than either one alone. You've been building a case against Cassian." "I've been building a position," he said, with a precision that told her the distinction mattered to him. "For 18 months. I want out of this organization on terms I control. Your exit, as it stands, is about personal protection. Mine is about something larger." Tessa turned her head slightly, a millimeter, barely, and Lenora saw in that fraction of movement the full weight of what Tessa was thinking. "Don't trust him. This is another man asking you to be useful. This is the same structure in a different voice." Lenora heard all of that from a millimeter of movement. She said, "I'll think about it." "You don't have a lot of time to think," Bennett said. "I'll think about it," she repeated, and ended the call. The car was silent. Then Tessa said, very quietly, and with considerable precision, "That man has been watching your movements for 5 days and is calling you at 5 in the morning to offer you a partnership." "Yes. That's not a partnership. That's a man trying to use your exit as a distraction for his own. Probably." "Lenora." "I know, Tessa. I know." She looked out the window. The airport was visible now. The particular constellation of lights that means departure. "I'm not agreeing to anything. I'm buying time. By not saying no, by not saying anything binding." She looked down at her phone. The call had lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. "He knew our location. He knew the schedule. He's been watching the accounts for 18 months, which means he may have been watching me from the day Cassian put my name on anything." She looked up. "Which means he knows more about what Sabine and I accessed than I thought anyone did." Tessa was quiet for a moment. "Does that change the plan?" "No." She said it immediately, because she had already calculated the answer before the question was complete. "We get on the plane. We get to Florence. And then I deal with Bennett from a distance with a lawyer present. And if he does something with what he knows, before you can deal with it." Lenora looked at her. The airport was close now, the signs directing them to departures, the ordinary infrastructure of leaving. "Then I deal with that too." She responded to Bennett with a single text as Tessa pulled into the departures lane. "I'll be in touch when I've had time to consider your proposal." He responded in 40 seconds. "Take your time. I've been patient for 18 months." It was the word patient that bothered her. all the way through check-in and security, and the particular suspended reality of an airport at 6 in the morning. Patient. Sabine had used that word. Patient men are rarely loyal for its own sake. She had been thinking of Bennett as Cassian's man. She was no longer sure that it had been accurate for quite some time. She boarded the flight to Florence with Tessa beside her, and her work satchel under the seat in front, and the quiet, controlled certainty of a woman who had made her decision and would see it through. She did not sleep on the flight. She read. She drank water. She watched the ocean beneath them for a stretch of time and thought about fractures and the things that cause them and the difference between a crack that travels and a crack that stops. She arrived in Florence at 9:40 the following morning, local time. Marcella Danti was waiting outside arrivals, not inside, because Marcella had opinions about airport interiors and preferred to meet people in the actual air. She was 68, thick-waisted and unhurried, with the hands of someone who had worked with her hands for 40 years, and the eyes of someone who had worked with her mind for just as long. She had been one of the first conservators Lenora had trained under, 25 years ago, and their relationship had the texture of the particular friendship that forms between people who respect each other's work, enough to be honest about its failures. She hugged Lenora at the curb without ceremony. "You look like you've been awake for 40 hours, Marcella said. 36, Lenora said. Roughly. Close enough. Marcella looked at her once more. The sharp and unsentimental assessment of a woman who didn't traffic in pretense. "Come, the studio has a room. Small, but the light is good." The studio was on the north side of the Oltrarno, in a building that had been a workshop of some kind for 3 centuries, and now contained, on its upper floors, the particular controlled environment required for serious restoration, work temperature and humidity management, north-facing windows for consistent indirect light, long work tables with adjustable task lighting, the smell of mineral spirits and linseed oil that Lenora associated with work, and therefore with competence, with the particular safety of knowing what you were doing. She sat on the edge of the small bed in the room Marcella gave her, and for the first time since she had found the message on the tablet, she let herself be still without any purpose attached to the stillness. She thought she might cry. She didn't. She sat for 20 minutes without moving, and then she took a shower, changed her clothes, and went down to the studio to look at what Marcella was working on, because she needed to look at something she understood completely. It was there, standing beside a 15th century panel painting, with significant crackluger running through the central figure that Sabine called. The name on her screen was enough. Sabine did not call during the day unless something had changed. Lenora answered. "Are you somewhere you can talk?" Sabine said. "Yes, sit down. I'm already standing. Tell me." Sabine paused for a fraction of a second, the pause of someone deciding between preparation and information. She chose information, because she knew Lenora well enough to know that preparation felt like condescension. Bennett Shaw filed a public civil complaint this morning against 4 of Cassian's companies by name, with documented financial evidence. A pause. It went public 2 hours ago. It's already being picked up by business press. Lenora's hand tightened on the phone. He moved. He moved without warning, without coordinating with you, without any prior indication to the people he'd been in contact with that he was this close to filing. How complete is it? Very. Sabine's voice had the quality of someone reading while they spoke. He had access I didn't know about. He had documentation, going back further than our records, and it's organized, Lenora. It's not a man who threw something together. He has been building this filing for a long time. The room was very still. The northern light came through the tall windows with the consistency she depended on, professionally the same light, always, that let her see what was actually there. She said, "Does our evidence overlap with his?" The pause this time was longer. "Yes." "How much?" "Enough that investigators looking at both filings are going to see the same transactions documented from 2 different directions." Sabine stopped. "Which, to someone looking at it from the outside, is going to look like coordination." The word landed like a dropped instrument. Coordination. 2 people, simultaneously, with overlapping evidence, one of whom had made contact with the other during her escape, the text she had sent Bennett from the departures lane, the call he had made at 5 in the morning, the call she had answered, all of it, was now part of a record that existed, that could be found. that already existed in Bennett's phone records and hers, and possibly in whatever logs a federal investigation generated when it started paying attention to communications of people connected to the accounts it was examining. Sabine, she said, I know. He used my exit. Yes. He waited for me to move, for me to create a distraction, for Cassian to be focused on finding me, and he filed the moment I was on a plane over the Atlantic. That's what it looks like. And the call he made, the text I sent back, are now potentially part of a record that suggests you two were in contact during the execution of parallel actions against the same target. She put her free hand flat on the work table. The surface was solid and cool, the reality of physical objects doing what they always did, existing without agenda, without the complicated weight of what Peltley built on top of them. How bad, she said. I don't know yet. It depends on how aggressively the investigation moves and how quickly they pull communications records. If they're already looking at Cassian's network and your name is on 3 of his accounts, you are not at the periphery of this. Sabine stopped. Then carefully, running farther makes it worse. Lenora understood that. She had understood it in the 11 seconds, between Sabine saying coordination and Sabine saying everything else. The part of her brain that assessed damage before anything else had already done the calculation. A woman who had accessed her husband's financial records, quietly moved assets, passed evidence to a compliance consultant, and then fled to Europe, and who had received a call from a man who simultaneously filed a public complaint against the same husband. That woman from the outside looked like a participant. Intent didn't appear on paper. Action did. She was in Florence. She had left a hotel suite with a note containing 4 words and no forwarding address. She had, from the perspective of any external eye, disappeared. She thought about the painting on Marcello's work table behind her, the crequelure moving through the central figure, not caused by violence, not by one event, but by years of pressure working beneath the surface that nobody had addressed until the surface began to visibly fracture. You could not fix that kind of damage by ignoring it. You could not fix it by running from it. You could only fix it by going directly into it, understanding its exact nature, and working with what was actually there rather than what you wished were there. She had built her entire professional life on that principle. She said, "Get me Harper Sloane's number, Lenora. Now, Sabine, and get me the name of a federal criminal defense attorney in Boston who does not have any existing relationship with Cassian Rourke or anyone connected to him. You're going to come forward." "I'm going to stop running," Lenora said. "There's a difference." The silence on the line lasted 4 seconds. Long for Sabine, who was not a woman who wasted time on pauses. "Okay," Sabine said. "I also need you to document every communication I've had with Bennett Shaw. Everyone. The call, the text, the timestamp of his text response. I need a separate document that establishes my independent timeline from the night I found the tablet through every action Sabine and I took, with timestamps showing those actions were completed before Bennett filed." "I already started it," Sabine said quietly. Lenora absorbed that. Sabine had started it, which meant Sabine had seen this possibility before Lenora had, which meant she had been protecting Lenora from it, while Lenora was still processing the flight. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet." A pause. "Cassian is already looking for you. His team started moving at 6 this morning, Boston time, which was when he found the suite." "How do you know that?" "Because one of the attorneys in his firm called a colleague of mine at 9:15 asking if she had any knowledge of your whereabouts." A beat. "The colleague is a friend," she called me. Cassian was not the problem right now. Cassian was a known quantity, his power, his reach, his capacity for response. He was the fracture she had already mapped. It was Bennett she hadn't mapped fully enough. It was Bennett who had sat across from her in a hotel lobby and said, "You're much sharper than people think," and meant it as both a compliment and an assessment. Who had called her at 5 in the morning, knowing her location and her schedule, who had filed his complaint the moment she boarded her flight and was 30,000 feet over the Atlantic and unable to respond in real time. She had escaped one man's architecture, only to discover she had been a useful piece in another man's from the beginning. The cold came back. Not panic, she was past the age, and the point in this particular situation where panic was useful. What she felt was the specific sharpness of understanding that she had miscalculated the number of people playing a game she had only recently learned the rules of. Cassian had treated her as a prop. Bennett had treated her as a distraction. Both of them had made the same foundational error. They had looked at a composed, professional woman of a certain age and seen something passive, something that would hold its position while the men around it executed their actual plans. Neither of them had made room in their calculations for what she would decide to do with what she knew. Marcella appeared in the doorway of the studio and looked at her with the direct, uncomplicated attention of someone who has lived long enough to read a room from a doorframe. She didn't speak. She raised her eyebrows once in the particular Italian economy of expression that meant, do you need something or do you need to be left alone? Lenora made a decision. She lowered the phone and said, Marcella, can you connect me to your internet? Secure, Marcella said. I have been using secure internet since 2009 because I don't trust anyone. Good, Lenora said. She raised the phone back. Sabine, I'm not disappearing. I'm going to contact Harper Sloan today. I'm going to make clear through the right channels and with counsel present that I am a cooperating witness who acted independently and came forward voluntarily. She paused. But I need everything documented first. Everything. The timeline, the communications, the evidence access, the transfers. Before I say a single word to anyone official, I need the paper to exist. How long do you need? She looked at the north-facing window. The light was consistent, reliable. The same this morning as it would be this afternoon. The same that had fallen through these windows for 300 years on hands, doing careful work on damaged things. 24 hours, she said. I'll have it done in 12. I know you will. She breathed out. And Sabine, I need you to find something for me. About Bennett, not about Cassian. About Bennett specifically, what he's been building, who he's been talking to, what he was actually trying to accomplish with that filing. She steadied herself. Because I walked into this thinking there was one man I needed to understand. And it turns out there were two. Sabine said, already on it. Lenora ended the call. She stood in the north light of a studio that smelled like work and time and the patient chemistry of repair, in a city she had always loved and never lived in, with a suitcase in a small room upstairs and a plan that had just fractured along a line she hadn't seen coming. And she understood, standing there with her hand still flat on the work table, and the painting behind her, and the whole impossible weight of the last 6 days pressing down on everything, that this was the moment. Not the wedding night, not the tablet, not the hotel lobby at 4:50 in the morning with her bag in her hand. This was the moment, because this was the moment she understood that safety was not what she had been moving toward. What she had been moving toward was a position from which she could stop being acted upon and start acting. And that position, in return, was not Florence. It was not distance. It was not disappearance. It was standing in the direct path of everything that was coming and being the one who had already done the work to understand exactly what it was. She picked up her phone again. She called Harper Sloan. The phone rang twice. A woman answered alert, professional, the voice of someone who answered unknown numbers because unknown numbers were part of the job. Lenora said, "My name is Lenora Whitlock. I was, until 6 days ago, the wife of Cassian Rourke. I have financial records, a documented timeline, and independent evidence of actions I took without coordination with anyone currently under investigation." She paused. "I want to come forward voluntarily, and I want to do it in a way that makes absolutely clear that I am a witness, not a participant." A silence on the other end. Brief, professional. And Harper Sloan said, "Mrs. Whitlock, I've been wondering when you'd call." And the thing that moved through Lenora then was not relief and not fear and not the residue of a marriage that had lasted 6 days. It was something quieter and more durable than any of those. The particular feeling of a woman who has located the center of the damage and is ready, finally, to begin. Harper Sloan did not waste time on pleasantries, she said. "Before we go further, I need you to understand something. The moment you called this number, the clock changed. Not started, changed. There's a difference. The clock started when your name went on those accounts. It changed just now because you chose to move toward the investigation instead of away from it. And that choice has a shelf life. It does not stay good indefinitely." "I understand that," Lenora said. "Good. Second thing, I'm going to ask you questions, and I need complete answers. not comfortable answers, not answers you've edited for how they'll sound. Everything you tell me, I will use to figure out how to keep you out of a room you don't want to be in. If you manage the information you give me, you will end up in that room anyway, and I won't be able to help you. A pause. Are we clear? We're clear. Where are you right now? Florence. Italy. A beat. Are you planning to stay in Florence? I'm planning to cooperate fully with any investigative process, including by secure video conference, or by returning to the United States if that becomes necessary. Another beat, slightly longer. Lenora could hear the quality of attention on the other end of the line, the specific listening of a person cataloging everything simultaneously. You've thought about this. I've had 12 hours on a plane and approximately 30 years of professional experience understanding that the only way to deal with damage is to go directly into it. Harper Sloan was quiet for 2 seconds. Then, all right, Lenora. Start from the beginning. The actual beginning, not the wedding night. The moment his name first appeared in your life. She talked for 90 minutes. Marcella brought coffee at some point and set it on the work table without interrupting, and Lenora drank it without tasting it, standing in the north light with one hand braced on the table, and her voice steady and her memory doing what it had always done, cataloging, sequencing, reproducing detail with the accuracy of someone who had trained herself to see and remember what other people walked past. Harper interrupted occasionally. Sharp, specific questions that told Lenora she was listening with both the legal architecture in mind and the human narrative, holding both simultaneously, which was the mark of someone who was genuinely good at what they did. At the end, Harper said, "The Bennett contact is a problem. I know, not insurmountable, but I want to be very specific about what we're dealing with. You received an unsolicited call from a man you had met twice, who identified himself, who informed you he had been monitoring your movements, and who proposed a coordination you did not agree to." Correct. And your response was to tell him you'd think about it and send a single text saying you'd be in touch when you'd considered his proposal. Yes, which a prosecutor could frame as non-refusal rather than non-agreement. I know that too, but Harper said, the single word had the weight of someone turning a corner. Your independent timeline, the documentation your accountant has been building, if it holds, it establishes that every action you took was completed before Bennett Shaw filed anything. You didn't coordinate. You acted and he exploited the timing. A pause. The question is whether the documentation's clean enough to make that case unambiguously. Sabine Mercer built it, Lenora said. I need to see it. You'll have it by end of day. Good. Harper's voice shifted slightly, not warmer but more direct. I'm going to contact the lead investigator on the Rourke financial case today. Not with specifics, just to establish that you exist, that you're represented, and that you are prepared to cooperate voluntarily. That call changes your position from fugitive adjacent to witness approaching, and it needs to happen fast. Do it. One more thing. Harper paused, and this pause was different from the others. It had a weight to it that Lenora recognized as the pause, before something the other person genuinely doesn't want to say. Cassian Rourke's legal team made contact this morning with the lead investigation team. We don't know the content of that contact. It could be routine legal positioning. It could be something else. Lenora absorbed that. Something else meaning he's putting something on the table. That's a possibility I want you to be prepared for. What would he put on the table? In a situation where someone with his level of exposure is trying to reduce that exposure, the available currency is information. About associates, about operations, a pause. About people whose names appear on his accounts. The room was absolutely still. He wouldn't. Tessa said from the corner, where she had been sitting so quietly for the last 40 minutes, that Lenora had almost forgotten she was there. Lenora held up one hand, not looking at her. Harper, if his legal team is suggesting I participated knowingly, I said it's a possibility I want you prepared for. I am not telling you it's happening. Harper's voice was level, but I want you to understand the landscape you're walking into. Cassian Rourke is a man facing significant criminal exposure. Bennett Shaw is facing significant criminal exposure. In those circumstances, people reach for whatever they can reach for. I understand. Do you have anyone in Boston right now who can be physically present at any location connected to you? Should Cassian's people attempt to access anything your apartment, your studio, anything with your name on it? Lenora thought. My daughter is in Seattle. Call her, Harper said. Not to alarm her, to locate her, and to make sure she knows not to speak to anyone asking about you without an attorney present. She ended the call. She stood in the studio. Then she called Marin. Marin answered on the second ring with the particular alert quality of a person who has been half waiting for a call they hoped wouldn't come. Marin was 30 years old and had her mother's eyes and her father's directness and a quality that was entirely her own. A bedrock practicality that had developed. Lenora had always thought, from seeing 7 years old when her father died, and learning very young that the world did not particularly adjust itself to accommodate your grief. Mom, not a question, a statement. I'm in Florence, Lenora said. I'm safe. I need to tell you some things. She told her. Not everything, not every layer of the financial structure, not the full scope of what Sabine had mapped, but the essential shape of it, the tablet, the message, the decision she had made, the complication of Bennett, and the call to Harper Sloan. Marin listened without interrupting, which was remarkable given what she was hearing, and which told Lenora that her daughter was doing exactly what Lenora had done on the wedding night, taking it in first, responding second. When Lenora finished, Marin said, I told you about how he looked at you. I know. I'm not saying that to say I told you so. I know that too. I'm saying it because Marin stopped. Lenora could hear her breathing, hear the adjustment happening in real time, the recalibration of a person who has just been handed a situation they didn't cause and now have to figure out what to do with. I'm saying it because I need to know you're actually okay. Not functioning, okay. I'm functioning, Lenora said. I'll be okay when this is done. What do you need from me? Don't talk to anyone who contacts you about me. Anyone at all. If someone calls, texts, shows up attorney only, no exceptions. Done. And Marin, she stopped herself. She had been about to say something that fell into the category of things mothers say to daughters when they are trying to soften a situation, and she stopped because Marin had never needed softening and didn't need it now. You were right about him, and I'm sorry that being right about him means you're in this situation. Marin says, don't apologize to me. Save it for later when you can actually mean it without everything being on fire. A pause. I love you. Call me tonight. Tonight, Lenora agreed. She ended the call. She sat down for the first time in 4 hours on the stool at the end of the work table, and she let the exhaustion come for approximately 90 seconds. She could feel it, clearly. A genuine physical weight pressing on her shoulders, behind her eyes, in the muscles of her hands, from holding the phone so tightly for so long. She let it come, and she let it exist for those 90 seconds without fighting it. Then she stood up. Tessa was looking at her from the corner with an expression that contained approximately 12 separate emotions and was expressing none of them because Tessa understood when the right response was presence and not expression. I need you to do something, Lenora said. Name it. Go back to Boston. Tessa's expression changed. Absolutely not. Tessa? No. She said it cleanly, without heat, the way you say no to something that isn't actually a question. I am not leaving you in a foreign country with one suitcase and a forensic accountant on a phone line while your husband's organization tries to figure out where you are. I need someone in Boston who I trust completely, Lenora said. Harper Sloan is my legal representative, but she doesn't know my life. My apartment, my studio, my files. There are physical things that need to be managed, and I cannot manage them from here. Tessa looked at her. The particular look of a person doing rapid internal calculation against their own instincts. Sabine is in Boston. Sabine is managing the financial documentation. I need someone who can physically be at my apartment if someone tries to access it. Someone who knows what matters and what doesn't, and who has the judgment to handle it, without calling me for every decision. A long pause. You'll call me every day, Tessa said. Every day. If anything changes, I'll call you before it changes. Tessa stood up from the corner and crossed the room and hugged her hard, the way old friends hug in situations where words are insufficient with actual physical force, the kind of embrace that means I am here and I see you and I am furious on your behalf and I will do what you need me to do. Lenora held on for 4 seconds, then let go, because the clock was running and she knew it. Tessa left for the airport 2 hours later. Lenora was alone in Florence. Not frightened, she examined the feeling carefully enough to confirm it was not fear. It was something closer to the sensation she had in the studio, sometimes when she was the last one there, at the end of a long day, working under task lighting on something difficult, with the particular quality of concentration comes when you have no other competing demands on your attention. It was solitude with purpose. It was the feeling of a woman who has identified exactly what she needs to do next. She worked. Sabine sent the documentation package at 7 that evening, Florence time. Lenora reviewed every page of it, at Marcella's work table, under the same north-facing skylights now going dim with early evening. The timeline was precise to the minute. The communications record was complete. The evidence of her independent action, predating Bennett's filing by days, predating his phone call, by the entire arc of what she and Sabine had built together, was laid out of something constructed by a person who understood that clarity was the only protection available. She sent it to Harper Sloan at 7:40. Harper responded within 20 minutes. "This is very good. Call me tomorrow at 9 your time." She ate dinner with Marcella that evening, pasta made by Marcella, because Marcella believed that a woman in crisis still needed to eat actual food prepared by actual hands. And she made it with the same precise attention she brought to everything, without fuss, without ceremony, setting 2 plates on the work table, because the kitchen was too small for anything comfortable. They ate mostly in silence, which was not an uncomfortable silence. Marcella ate, and occasionally looked at Lenora with the assessing directness she applied to damaged paintings, not clinical, but careful, honest. Eventually Marcella said, "How bad is it?" "Bad enough." "Will you survive it?" "Yes." "Good," Marcella said, and went back to her pasta. Lenora slept for 5 hours, which was more than she expected, and woke at 4:30 to the particular darkness of a Florentine autumn morning and the immediate return of full consciousness that had been her brain's operating mode since the wedding night. She checked her phone. 11 missed calls from a Boston number she didn't recognize. 4 texts from the same number sent between 2 and 3 in the morning Boston time. The first text said, "This is Cassian. I need you to call me." The second said, "I'm not calling to ask you to come back. I need to tell you something before the attorneys make it impossible." The third said, "What Bennett did isn't what you think it is. He's been working against both of us. Call me." The fourth said, "Lenora, please." She read them 3 times. Then she forwarded them to Harper Sloan with a single line, "Cassian contacted me. What do I do?" Harper's response came 8 minutes later, which meant Harper was also awake at whatever hour it was in Boston. "Do not respond. Do not call him. Do not engage under any circumstances without me present. I'll explain at 9. She set the phone down. She looked at the ceilings of the small room, plaster, old, with a hairline crack running from the window toward the center that someone had at some point filled imperfectly, the fill material a slightly different shade from the original. She could see it clearly in the early dark. The repair was visible, but the crack had stopped. At 9, she called Harper. Harper said, "Cassian Rourke's legal team contacted the federal investigation yesterday afternoon. We now know the content of that contact." A pause that had mass to it. "He didn't offer information about you. He offered information about Bennett." Lenora said nothing. Waited. "He told investigators that Bennett Shaw had been operating a parallel financial structure within his organization for approximately 2 years, skimming, redirecting, building personal exposure into Cassian's architecture as a kind of leverage against him." Harper's voice was precise and fast. "He provided documentation, his own documentation, separate from Bennett's filing." "Which means," Lenora said slowly, "which means Cassian has been aware of what Bennett was doing for some period of time, and rather than expose him either to investigators or publicly, he kept him close and let him continue, presumably because exposing Bennett would have meant exposing his own architecture to the exposure Bennett had access to." "Mutually assured destruction," Lenora said. "For 18 months. Yes." She stood up from the bed. Her legs were stiff. She walked to the window and looked at the dark street below a single streetlight, a parked Fiat, the heavy quiet of a city that had been existing for 2,000 years, and found most human crises appropriately small in that context. "Bennett's filing," she said. "The public complaint was the shot across the bow, the moment when the mutual destruction stopped being mutual." Harper paused. "He moved first. And Cassian responded by going to investigators with what he had on Bennett." "Yes." Which she stopped. The picture was completing itself, which is why Bennett called me. He needed my exit to happen simultaneously. He needed Cassian's attention split between finding me and managing the filing. He used my departure as cover. That's how the investigators are reading it. And now they need to know whether I was in it with him. Yes. Harper's voice was level. Lenora, this is the moment the whole thing turns on. Bennett's attorneys are going to argue that his actions and yours were coordinated. Cassian's attorneys are going to argue whatever is most useful to Cassian in any given moment, which right now appears to be cooperating with investigators on Bennett, which indirectly helps you, because if Cassian is corroborating that Bennett running his own operation, it makes Bennett's attempt to fold you into his narrative look like exactly what it is. Why would Cassian help me? The question sat in the air. Harper said, I don't know. I want you to think about whether you do. She did think about it. For approximately 10 seconds. Standing at the window in the early Florence morning, with the city dark and still below her, and the whole impossible weight of a 6-day marriage and a 30-year professional life, and the particular shape of a man she had loved in the specific, documented, verifiable way that she had loved him. She thought about his face during the vows. She thought about the laugh in the auction gallery, which she still believed had been real. She thought about what he had built, and what he had used her for, and what he had written to Celeste temporary, and she held all of it simultaneously, the way she held complicated damage simultaneously, without resolving it prematurely, without forcing it into a simpler shape than it actually had. He knows I didn't do anything wrong, she said. He knows it specifically because he made sure I didn't. He kept me ignorant of the criminal architecture deliberately. He said so in the message to Celeste. She paused. Whatever he is, he's a precise man. He knows exactly what I knew and what I didn't. And if he's telling investigators the truth about Bennett, he may be telling the truth about you as well. Yes. A silence. Then Harper said, there's a secure video conference scheduled for tomorrow. Federal investigators. They want to interview you formally, with counsel present. A beat. This is the interview that determines your classification, witness or participant. Everything else follows from this. Lenora's hand was steady on the phone. She noted that. She noted it the way she noted her own physical responses in high stakes. Moments in the studio, not with pride, not with surprise anymore, just with the accuracy of someone who had learned to observe herself without judgment. What time, she said. 10 a.m. Florence time. I'll be on the same conference. I'll be here. Lenora. Harper paused. They're going to ask about Bennett's contact. They're going to go through it in detail, the call, the text, the exact wording. They're going to ask why you answered an unknown number at 5 in the morning from a man you had met twice. I'll tell them the truth. Which is? She thought about it for a second. Not because she didn't know the answer, she knew the answer clearly, but because she wanted to say it in the precise way it was true, not in a softened way, not in a way that made her sound either more strategic or more naive than she actually was. Because I was gathering information, she said, before deciding whether he represented another threat. I had already learned that week that my husband's organization had a shadow architecture I hadn't known about. When an unknown caller identifies himself as someone from the center of that architecture and tells me he's been watching me, the intelligent response is not to hang up. It's to find out what he knows and what he wants. A pause. Then Harper Sloan said, say exactly that. Those exact words. The conference began at 10 the following morning. Marcella vacated the studio without being asked, simply appearing at the door at 9:45 in her coat with a bag over her arm and saying she would be back at 2 and leaving, which was one of many reasons Lenora had trusted this woman for 25 years. 2 investigators appeared on screen. A man and a woman, mid-40s, both of them, with the specific quality of people who had done this many times and had learned to keep their own reactions completely internal. They introduced themselves. They stated the formal parameters of the conference. They confirmed that Harper Sloan was present on the line. Then they began. They went through every transfer, every document, every date and account, number and authorization she had made from the moment her name appeared on Cassian's financial architecture. They asked questions with the specific precision of people who already had the answers and were measuring the accuracy of her responses against them. She answered, without embellishment. When they reached the night she found the tablet, the male investigator leaned slightly forward. Walk us through exactly what you did after you read those messages. She walked them through it. The photographs, the decision to stay, the contact with Sabine and Tessa, the 5 days, the documentation. The female investigator said, "You stayed with your husband for 5 days after discovering evidence of fraud and infidelity." Yes. Why? Because leaving immediately would have told him I'd found something before I had time to document what was actually there. I needed to understand the scope of what I was dealing with before I moved. She paused. My professional training is built around the principle that you do not touch damaged work until you understand what happened to it. I applied that principle. The investigators looked at each other, a quick, barely perceptible exchange. The male investigator said, "Tell us about the contact from Bennett Shaw." She told them. Every word. Every second of it, the location, the timing, the content of the call, the text she sent, the text he returned. She did not soften any of it. She did not emphasize her non-agreement in a way that felt performative. She described it the way she described damage, precisely, without agenda, with the understanding that accuracy was more useful than self-protection. When she finished, the female investigator said, "You answered a call from an unknown number at 5 in the morning." Yes. Why? She said the words Harper had confirmed. She said them steadily, without rushing them, with the simple clarity of someone stating something that was true and knew it was true, and had nothing to add to it. The investigators were quiet for 4 seconds. Then the male investigator said, "Mrs. Whitlock, I want to be direct with you. Please." Bennett Shaw's attorneys are arguing that your actions and his were coordinated as part of a joint to damage Cassian Rourke's organization. They will present your communications as evidence of that coordination. He paused. Your independent timeline contradicts that argument. Your testimony contradicts that argument. And he stopped, looked at something off-screen, then looked back. And Cassian Rourke's statement to this investigation contradicts that argument. The studio was utterly quiet. Lenora sat absolutely still. Cassian Rourke, the investigator said carefully, provided a statement confirming that he placed your name on financial accounts and corporate structures deliberately, as part of an effort to create the appearance of marital legitimacy during an active federal inquiry. He confirmed that you had no knowledge of the criminal architecture underlying those accounts. And he confirmed, a pause, that the decision to keep you ignorant of that architecture was his, deliberate, and complete. The silence lasted 5 full seconds. Harper's voice came through the audio connection. "I want that statement in writing before we proceed further." "It will be provided," the female investigator said. Lenora did not move. She was looking at the screen with the same expression she wore in the studio when something emerged from beneath layers of paint that she hadn't expected. Not shock, exactly. Not relief. The complex, unpretty feeling of a reality resolving into a shape that was different from every version she had prepared for. Cassian had told the truth. He had damaged his own defense to protect her from a charge that was never legitimate in the first place. She did not know what to do with that. She filed it, carefully, in the part of herself that dealt with things too complicated to resolve, in the middle of an active federal interview. The female investigator said, "We have one final area of questioning, Mrs. Whitlock." "Yes." "In your assessment," she stopped, as if recalibrating the question. "Based on everything you accessed and documented, during those 5 days, the transfers, the account structures, the corporate entities, do you believe Bennett Shaw's actions were independent of Cassian Rourke's criminal organization, or embedded within it?" Lenora looked at the camera. She thought about Sabine's document, the 18 months of evidence, the patience of a man who had spent 2 decades inside an architecture, learning it from the inside, building his own position so slowly that no one had noticed until he was ready to move. She thought about what Sabine had said. Patient men are rarely loyal for its own sake. She said, Bennett Shaw wasn't acting against Cassian's organization. He was using it. For 18 months, he positioned himself so that when Cassian finally faced real pressure, Bennett could walk away clean on his own terms and frame anyone nearby as collateral evidence. She paused. He didn't want to destroy the organization. He wanted to be the one who survived it. The investigators looked at each other again. This time the look lasted longer. The male investigator said, "Mrs. Whitlock, we are prepared to classify you formally as a cooperating witness in this investigation. This classification, And at that exact moment, Harper Sloane's voice cut in controlled, but with an edge that Lenora had not heard in it before. Before you finish that sentence, I'm looking at something that just came through on the docket. A pause that lasted 2 full seconds. Bennett Shaw's attorneys filed an emergency motion 20 minutes ago. They're arguing that Lenora Whitlock was the primary architect of the evidence transfer to Harper Sloane, not a witness, not a bystander, and they're requesting that her cooperating witness classifications be suspended pending a full review. The room went completely still. The female investigator said, "On what basis?" "A phone record," Harper said. "They're citing a call between Lenora and Shaw as evidence of pre-coordination." A pause. "But that's not the part that concerns me right now." "What is?" Lenora said. "They filed it with new evidence attached," Harper said. "Something they claim was recovered from Shaw's personal records." Another pause. "It's a document, Lenora, with your name on it, and a date that predates everything we've established in your independent timeline by." The audio connection crackled. "Harper," Lenora said. "By 3 weeks." Harper finished. "Which, if authentic, would mean you had contact with Bennett Shaw before you ever found anything on Cassian's tablet." Lenora's hands went flat on the work table. The north light fell through the skylights with its characteristic consistency, the same as always, reliable, identical to what it had been. An hour ago. A day ago, 300 years ago, and beneath it, a woman who had spent her entire professional life learning to distinguish what was original from everything that came afterward, sat very still, with the full weight of a fabricated document pressing down on the clean architecture of everything she had built, and understood that the last battle was not the one she had prepared for. It was the one Bennett Shaw had prepared for her. The document had a date on it. That was the first thing Harper read aloud from the filing, the date, printed cleanly in the header of what Bennett Shaw's attorneys were calling a coordination agreement, a document that bore Lenora Whitlock's name and a timestamp 3 weeks before she had a glass of champagne, with a flat glass of champagne and a tablet that wasn't hers, and a message that rewrote everything. Lenora sat at Marcella's work table and did not move. The investigators on the video screen had gone very still, in the particular way of people who have just watched a situation change shape in front of them, and are recalibrating without showing it. The female investigator had her pen down. The male investigator was looking at something off screen with the focused attention of someone reading fast. Harper said, "I need 5 minutes." "Take them," the male investigator said. The conference was placed on hold, a gray waiting screen, a small icon indicating the connection was live, but paused. Lenora looked at it. She was aware of her own breathing, the specific rhythm of it, slower than it should have been given what was happening, which was either composure or the physiological response to a situation so large that the body simply refuses to perform panic at the appropriate scale. She picked up her phone and called Sabine. Sabine answered before the first ring finished. "I'm already looking at it. Tell me what you see." The sound of keys, fast, unhesitating. "It's a PDF. Formatted as a memorandum of understanding, no letterhead, no notarization, but structured like a legal document. 2 parties listed, Lenora Whitlock and Bennett Shaw. Dated September 4th. A pause. "That's 22 days before your wedding." "I have never seen that document," Lenora said. Her voice was flat and precise. "I have never communicated with Bennett Shaw before the morning he called me in the car." "I know that. Can you tell me if it's fabricated?" The pause this time was longer. "Not from a PDF. I need metadata, file creation data, edit history, the digital fingerprint of who made the document, and on what machine and when." Another pause. "That requires forensic document analysis. That is not something I can do in 5 minutes." "How long real analysis? Days." "A preliminary read on obvious fabrication markers, inconsistent formatting, anachronistic software signatures, metadata that contradicts the stated date, maybe 4 hours if I have the right tool and the right file." Bennett's attorneys filed it as evidence. Can Harper get the original file? She can demand it in discovery. But that takes time, and the emergency motion doesn't need to wait for discovery. It just needs to create enough doubt to suspend your classification. Lenora looked at the gray waiting screen, which buys Bennett time, which is exactly what it's designed to do, Sabine said. "Lenora, this is not a document created to convict you. It's a document created to slow you down, to muddy your status long enough for his attorneys to negotiate his exposure, down while your cooperation is in question. She understood that. She had understood it in the 8 seconds between Harper saying 3 weeks in the silence that followed, but because she knew what documents were and what they were for, and what it meant when a document appeared at exactly the right moment to derail exactly the right process. Documents didn't appear, they were made. And the making left marks if you knew where to look. She said, Sabine, the document uses my name in a specific format. Do you have it in front of you? Yes. How is it spelled? A pause, Lenora A. Whitlock. She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. I do not use a middle initial. I have not used a middle initial on any professional document, any legal document, any correspondence of any kind in 30 years. My middle name is Anne. I dropped the initial in 1994 when I started publishing under my professional name, and I have not used it since. The silence on Sabine's end lasted 4 full seconds. Say that, Sabine said very quietly. Lenora A. Whitlock. With an initial. I don't sign that way. I don't write that way. Any document with my cooperation or my input would not have that initial because I never provide it and haven't for 30 years. And Bennett Shaw would not have known that. He met me twice, in passing. In a hotel lobby and at a dinner, she could feel something sharp at her and not triumph. It was too early for triumph. And she was too experienced to confuse the location of a detail with the resolution of a problem. But something. A thread. Anyone who knows me, anyone who has worked with me, corresponded with me, received anything from me in the last 3 decades, does not have a document with that initial on it, because I don't produce them. It's not enough by itself, Sabine said immediately. It's a detail. His attorneys will argue clerical variation, they'll argue. I know it's not enough by itself. It's the thread. Find me the rest. She looked at the work table, the surface of it, the actual grain of the wood beneath the accumulated marks of 40 years of careful work. Someone else's 40 years before she ever arrived here. Pull the metadata. Pull the software signature. Pull every technical marker on that file and find me what doesn't match. Working, Sabine said, and the line went quiet except for the sound of keys. The conference screen shifted from gray back to active. The investigators reappeared. Harper's voice came back on the line, and there was something different in it now, a controlled sharpness that Lenora had not heard before. The sound of a person who has found something and is being very careful about how she presents it. Before we address the filed document, Harper said, I want to put something on the record. My client has identified a specific and verifiable anomaly in the document Bennett Shaw's attorneys submitted as evidence. The male investigator said, Go ahead. The document refers to my client as Lenora A. Whitlock, with a middle initial. Harper paused, and Lenora could hear the precision of someone who had confirmed something in the 5 minutes of hold time and was now presenting it with the care it deserved. My client has not used a middle initial in any professional, legal, or personal document since 1994. I have before me, pulled in the last 4 minutes, 17 documents bearing her signature or her type name across a span of 29 years contracts, authentication reports, legal filings, correspondence with federal institutions, including the IRS. Not one of them carries that initial. The female investigator's pen was moving. Furthermore, Harper continued, Bennett Shaw had 2 documented interactions with my client prior to her departure from Boston. A brief exchange in a hotel lobby and a dinner attended by multiple people. He had no access to any documents bearing her name and no basis for knowing her naming convention. A pause. The document his attorneys filed was not prepared with her knowledge or input. It could not have been, because anyone who had ever received anything from Lenora Whitlock in the last 30 years would know she does not sign with a middle initial. The male investigator said, This will need to be formally verified. Agreed, Harper said. We are requesting full forensic analysis of the submitted document metadata, software signature, creation date, edit history. We are requesting it be treated as potentially fabricated evidence pending that analysis. And we are requesting that the emergency motion to suspend my client's cooperating witness classification be denied on the grounds that the supporting evidence is of contested authenticity. The investigators looked at each other. The look lasted longer this time. The female investigator said, We'll need to take this offline. Of course, Harper said. We'll be available. The conference ended. Lenora sat at the work table in the north light with her phone in her hand, and Sabine still running analysis on the other line, and the particular quiet of a studio that had been working on damaged things for 40 years. And she thought about the middle initial, the small and specific and entirely accidental mistake that Bennett Shaw had made when he constructed a document using a name he had seen in newspaper profiles and financial records and public filings, but had never received directly from the woman herself. It was the kind of mistake that came from distance, from treating a person as a subject rather than a source, from assembling an image of someone from secondary materials and assuming the image was complete. She thought about Cassian making the same category of error, assembling an image of who Lenora Whitlock was from her professional reputation, her composure, her history, and missing the interior of it completely. Missing the thing that actually made her dangerous, which was not her access to his accounts or her relationship with Sabine or even her network of people who trusted her. It was the 30 years of training herself to see exactly what was there. Not what she wanted to see, not what would be convenient to see, what was actually verifiably, documentably there. Both men had looked at her and seen something incomplete. Both men had paid for the incompleteness. Sabine called back at 1:17 in the afternoon. The document was created on September 19th, Sabine said, without preamble. Metadata confirms it. The file properties show a creation date of September 19th, which is 15 days after the date printed in the document's header, and 13 days after your wedding. She was reading fast, her voice clipped and precise. The software used was a version of Adobe Acrobat that was updated on September 8th, meaning the version that created this file did not exist. On September 4th, the date the document claims to have been created. The studios were very still. He made it after the wedding, Lenora said. He made it after your wedding, after your departure chart, and backdated it. The software itself didn't exist in the version he used on the date he claimed. A pause. This is not ambiguous. This is a forensic fact. Any competent digital forensics examiner will arrive at the same conclusion in the same amount of time. Lenora closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Not relief. She had been right that it was too early for relief. And it was still too early, because knowing something and proving it in a proceeding were different things, and she had not confused them. But the specific exhaustion of having held a thread for 4 hours and found it led somewhere real that settled through her, like something physical, a weight redistributing itself into a more manageable arrangement. Send it to Harper, she said. Already did. All of it. Every technical detail. I want it in language that a federal judge can understand without a translator. Already formatted that way, Sabine said, Lenora. A pause. It's over. The document is fabricated, and it's provably fabricated. His attorneys filed a piece of evidence that will destroy their own client's credibility the moment a forensic examiner looks at it for 20 minutes. It's not over yet. It's substantially over. When Bennett Shaw is facing a judge, and I am formally classified as a cooperating witness, and the transfers Cassian put in my name are legally documented as his responsibility, and not mine, then it's substantially over. She opened her eyes. Until then, we keep working. Sabine was quiet for a moment. Then, with a quality in her voice Lenora had not heard before, something warmer than her usual precise professional tone. You know, most people would have fallen apart 3 days ago. I've had practice, Lenora said. And she meant it without drama, because it was simply true. She had been rebuilding things from inadequate materials for 30 years, and the skill transferred, as skills do, to situations its original context hadn't anticipated. She stepped outside. The street was ordinary cobblestone, a narrow sidewalk, a woman with a bicycle and a camp bag over the handlebars moving past without looking at her. The autumn air in Florence had the particular quality of Italian autumn, different from Boston autumn in a way she had always struggled to articulate, and had finally concluded was not about temperature or light, but about the specific weight of accumulated time in a place, the way certain cities carry their own history in the actual air. She called Tessa. Tessa answered in one ring. Talk to me. The document is fabricated. Sabine has the proof. Bennett made it after the wedding and backdated it and used a version of software that didn't exist on the date he claimed. Silence. Then Tessa said, "Oh, thank God," and then stopped, and Lenora could hear her breathing, could hear the specific release of someone who has been holding something very tightly for a very long time. It's not done yet, Lenora said. I know that. But Tessa stopped again. You're going to be okay. I'm going to be okay, Lenora agreed. How is my apartment? Untouched. I've been there every day. Nobody's been near it. A pause. Cassian's people made and passed by the street. I watched them from the coffee shop across from your building. They sat in a car for 40 minutes and left. He wasn't going to touch anything of mine. I know. I just wanted to be sure, Tessa. She looked at the street. The woman with the bicycle had turned the corner. The cobblestones were old enough that she didn't want to think about what they had seen. Thank you. Don't, Tessa said. Just come home when it's done. The next 14 days moved the way complicated things move, when they are finally, irreversibly in motion, not fast, not smooth, with the grinding of institutional processes and legal language, and the particular exhaustion of being a primary witness in something large. Lenora gave testimony in 3 separate sessions, each one building on the previous, each one adding to the documented record of what she had done, and when and why, and in what sequence, and with what knowledge. She was precise. She was complete. She answered without embellishment and without self-protection, because she had nothing to protect herself from and understood that attempting to would only create the appearance of something that wasn't there. The forensic analysis of Bennett's document came back on the 9th day. It confirmed everything Sabine had found: creation date, software version, metadata inconsistencies, and an additional detail the forensic examiner had caught that even Sabine hadn't: a font kerning standard that had been introduced in the software's September update, present in the document's body text, which would have been technically impossible to produce on the date stated in the header. Bennett Shaw's attorneys withdrew the document from evidence. They did it quietly, in the language of procedural withdrawal rather than admission, but the withdrawal itself was its own statement, and everyone in the process understood what it meant. Bennett's negotiating position collapsed the following day. Without the fabricated coordination argument, without the ability to fold Lenora into his narrative, he was left with his own exposure unmitigated by any leverage. His financial records, the ones he had filed so carefully, the ones he had over 14 months documented his own involvement as thoroughly as they documented Cassian's. The filing that was supposed to be his exit strategy became the primary evidence against him, because the investigators who followed it found not just what he had intended them to find, but everything adjacent to it, the full architecture of a man who had been operating inside criminal infrastructure for 2 decades, and had built his own criminal infrastructure within it. He accepted a plea agreement on the 12th day, significant prison time, full cooperation as a condition of the agreement, which meant that everything he had on Cassian, and he had considerable now, belonged to the investigation, under terms he no longer controlled. The exit he had planned so carefully, the clean departure on his own terms, did not happen. What happened instead was the thing that happened when a patient man finally makes a move and discovers that the board he was playing on had changed while he was positioning his pieces. Lenora was formally classified as a cooperating witness on the same day Bennett signed his agreement. Harper called her with the news, at 8 in the evening, Florence time, and for the first time in their acquaintance, allowed something that was not strictly professional to come through her voice. A brief, genuine satisfaction, the kind that belongs specifically to a person who does difficult work and occasionally gets to see it come out right. It's official, Harper said. You're a witness. Everything you did is documented as independent, lawful, and conducted in good faith. The asset protections Sabine established are clean. You are not the subject of any investigation. You have no liability exposure. Lesora sat down. She was in the small room upstairs, on the edge of the bed, and the hairline crack in the ceiling plaster was visible in the lamplight, the imperfect repair, the stopped fracture. She had looked at it every night for 2 weeks. Thank you, she said, for everything. It was good work, Harper said, and Lenora understood that from Harper Sloan, this was the highest available register of professional compliment. She called Marin. Marin cried. Not dramatically, she was not a dramatic person, but Lenora could hear it in the specific quality of her daughter's breathing, the small break in the voice that Marin controlled immediately and then let go again, the way people cry when they have been holding themselves together for someone else, and the someone else finally tells them they can let go. Come home, Marin said. Soon, Lenora said. Not yet. Mom, there are things I need to finish here first. Real things, work. She looked at the crack in the ceiling. I need to work for a little while before I can go anywhere. Marin was quiet for a moment. Then, okay. But I'm coming to you. When? Next week. Good, Lenora said. Marcella will feed you. She feeds everyone. She heard Marin almost laugh. Almost. Cassian called 2 days later. She had been expecting the call. Harper had told her it was likely, had told her she was under no obligation to take it, had told her that if she did take it, she should be aware that anything said in the conversation could theoretically be relevant to ongoing proceedings, though practically speaking, material questions were already answered. She took the call. He sounded different, not diminished. Cassian Rourke was not a man who diminished easily or completely, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. But the specific quality of authority that had characterized his voice in every conversation she had known of him was absent or reduced or had shifted into something quieter. He sounded like a man who had put something down and wasn't sure yet what his hands felt like without it. I didn't know if you'd answer, he said. I almost didn't. A pause. How are you? Functioning, she said, which is what I am right now. That's fair. He was quiet for a moment. I told them the truth. About what I did. About your role. I wanted you to know that I know, she said. Harper told me. I need to say it anyway. Another pause longer. I put your name on those accounts. I used our marriage as camouflage. I made those decisions deliberately. And I kept you ignorant of what they were connected to deliberately. And none of what happened to you in the last 3 weeks is something you caused or deserved. She sat with that. The room was quiet. Outside the window, Florence was doing what Florence did at mid-morning, existing with the particular unhurried continuity of a city that has outlasted everyone who ever tried to rush it. Why did you tell them the truth? She said. Specifically, not the version where it was the right thing to do. The actual reason. He was quiet for 4 seconds. Because I looked at what you did, he said finally. You found out on our wedding night. You stayed for 5 days. You documented everything. You protected yourself without stealing from me. You went to investigators voluntarily. And you told the truth under every form of pressure Bennett and his people could manufacture. A pause. You did all of that. And it was the most dignified thing I have ever watched anyone do. And it made the thing I was considering, suggesting you had participated knowingly, the most indecent thing I could imagine doing to another human being. The room was very still. Lenora did not feel gratitude, exactly. It was more complicated than gratitude. What she felt was the specific and not entirely comfortable recognition of a genuine thing existing inside a man who had also done genuinely terrible things, and the refusal to flatten either truth to make the other easier to hold. That statement helped me, she said, significantly. You should know that. I know. It doesn't rewrite what you did. I know that too. You used me, she said. Not with heat. With precision. You selected me for what I represented to your situation, and you constructed a relationship within which I believed I was loved. And the belief was real, even if the construction was not. And the cost of that is something I will be paying for some time, regardless of how cleanly the legal situation resolves. He said nothing. She could hear him breathing. I did love you, she said. I want you to know that, because I think you should know it and not be able to unknow it. Whatever you were doing, whatever I represented to your strategy, I was not performing. I loved you completely. A silence that lasted so long, she thought the connection might have dropped. Then Cassian said, in a voice that had lost whatever remained of its professional register, I know. Good, she said. Lenora. Don't, she said, not unkindly. With finality. The particular finality of someone who has reached the exact end of a conversation and knows it. Whatever you want to say next, I'm not the right person to say it to. I was never the right person. That's something you need to sit with on your own. He accepted that. She could hear him accept it, the specific quality of a man receiving a verdict he had known was coming, and finding it no easier for the anticipation. Take care of yourself, she said. You too, he said. She ended the call. She sat for a few minutes in the quiet of the room. Not processing, she had done enough processing to last a considerable time. Just sitting, the way you sit after something large, has concluded, when the body needs a moment to register that the weight has shifted. Then she went downstairs to work. Marcella had a 15th century panel painting on the main work table, the one with the significant craquelure. Through the central figure, the one Lenora had looked at the morning, she called Harper Sloane. Marcella was elsewhere in the building, managing correspondence or supplies or the 10,000 administrative details of running a serious restoration studio. And the painting was there under the north light, patient in the way old things are patient, holding its damage and its beauty in the same surface without apology. Lenora put on her work coat. She pulled her hair back. She positioned the task light at the angle she preferred. She selected her instruments with the automatic confidence of someone who had done this so many times the selection was no longer a decision but a reflex. She looked at the craquelure. It was old, damaged, centuries old, the kind that had been accumulating so slowly for so long that by the time anyone looked closely, it was part of the painting's identity. The crack ran through the central figure at a diagonal, from the left shoulder downward, visible only under certain angles of light. Someone had attempted a repair at some point in the mid-20th century, probably with the best intentions and the tools available at the time, and the repair had been adequate for decades, but was now failing. The fill material contracting at a different rate than the surrounding paint layer, creating a new set of stresses around the original fracture. The incorrect repair was causing more damage than the original crack. She had seen this before, more times than she could count. The impulse to cover damage rather than understand it. The false restoration that looked fine for years and then failed in a way that made the original problem worse. She began with documentation. She always began with documentation, the photographic record, the mapping, the precise inventory of what she was looking at before she touched anything. It took an hour. She did it without hurrying. Marcella appeared at the door at some point and watched her for a moment without interrupting, then disappeared, which was one of many reasons their friendship had lasted 25 years. Marin arrived in Florence on a Thursday. She came directly from the airport in a taxi, appeared at the studio door with her bag over her shoulder and her father's directness in her face and her mother's eyes, and Lenora set down her instruments and crossed the studio and held her daughter for longer than she had held anyone in 3 weeks. Marin held back with the same force, both of them standing in the north light of a studio that smelled like mineral spirits and old wood, not saying anything, because there was nothing yet that needed to be said. When they separated, Marin looked at her mother's face, with the careful attention of someone conducting an assessment. She did not soften what she saw. She did not perform reassurance. "You look tired," she said. "I am tired, but not broken." "No," Lenora said. "Not broken." Marin looked around the studio, the paintings in various states of repair, the instruments laid out with their particular careful order, the north light falling consistently through the skylights onto work that required exactly that quality of illumination to be done correctly. She looked at it all with the open attention of someone seeing it for the first time and understanding it. "This is what you do," Marin said. "Not a question. This is what I do." "You fix things. I stabilize them," Lenora said. "Sometimes I fix them. Sometimes the best I can do is make sure they don't get worse." She looked at the panel painting on the main table, the craquelure and the failing old repair, and the centuries of accumulated pressure beneath the surface. "Sometimes that's enough." Marin was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you going to come home?" Lenora looked at the painting. She looked at the north light. She looked at the studio that had been doing this work for 40 years, in a building that had been standing for 300. In a city that had been making things and fixing things and outlasting the catastrophes of every era it had lived through. "I've been offered a position here," she said. "Permanent. Restoration commissions under my own name." Marin absorbed that. She was good at absorbing things. She had been good at it since she was 7 years old. 7 years old. And I think I'm going to take it. "Is that running away?" Lenora turned and looked at her daughter. The question was honest. Marin did not ask questions she didn't mean to ask. She was not accusing. She was assessing, the way her mother had taught her to assess things, by going directly at them. "No," Lenora said. "Running away is what I was doing in the car to the airport. This is choosing." She held her daughter's gaze. "There's a difference. I've been learning the difference this month." Marin looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, the single clean nod of a woman who has received an answer she believes and can work with. "I'll visit," Marin said. "I know you will, a lot. I hope so." They ate dinner with Marcella that evening, the same small table, the same good food, produced with the unassuming competence, the same north-facing windows, now dark with autumn evening. Marcella and Marin got along with the immediate ease of people who share the same fundamental quality of directness. And the conversation was ordinary food, Florence, the painting on the work table, Marin's work in Seattle, the particular logistics of a life being relocated to another country. And Lenora sat in the middle of it and felt, for the first time since September, the specific texture of ordinary life as something belonging to her, not performing ordinary life, not maintaining it as cover, not living inside it as camouflage for something else, just living in it as herself. The investigation concluded in its formal stages 6 weeks later. Bennett Shaw received 7 years. The cooperation he had offered, the careful filing he had built over 18 months, had documented his own involvement as completely as it documented anyone else's, and the plea agreement reduced the sentence from what it could have been, but did not eliminate it. He went to prison on a November morning in Boston, and Lenora was in Florence and did not watch the coverage. Cassian's empire, the legitimate parts and the shadow parts, was dismantled under federal oversight over the following year. He avoided prison through extensive cooperation, providing information about the political relationships and financial channels that had allowed his shadow network to operate for a decade. The cooperation was comprehensive and costly. It required exposing people who had depended on his discretion, burning relationships he had spent 20 years building, and accepting a settlement that left him a fraction of what he had been worth. He spent those months rebuilding the legitimate pieces, slowly, under oversight, without the architecture of power that had surrounded him for so long that he had probably ceased to be able to feel its edges. Celeste Arden gave truthful testimony about the relationship, the messages, the specific content of what Cassian had told her about Lenora. She was not charged with anything. She left Boston in December and did not return. In January, she sent Lenora a single message brief, honest, without self-pity, and without asking for absolution. It said, "I hope you're somewhere better. You deserved that from the beginning." Lenora read it twice. Then she wrote back, "So did you. Take care of yourself." She didn't hear from Celeste again. She didn't expect to. Some things resolve not into friendship or enmity, but into the clean, particular peace of two people who have been honest with each other and have nothing left that requires resolution. On a cold morning in November, standing outside the studio on the narrow cobblestone street with a coffee she had made herself, Lenora's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Boston number, one she recognized. She answered. Cassian said, "I'm in Florence." She was quiet for a moment. "Why? I needed to say something in person." "I'm outside. I can see you from here." A pause. "I'm alone. I don't have anyone with me." No attorneys, no staff, nobody. She looked up the street. He was 50 yards away, standing on the cobblestones in a coat that was good but not extraordinary coat he would have worn a year ago. He looked smaller than she remembered, which she knew was not accurate. He was the same physical size he had always been, but something in his posture had changed, some quality of the space he occupied. He was not filling the street the way he would have. He was just standing in it. She walked toward him. They stood 4 feet apart on the cobblestones of a Florentine street, while the cold November morning went on around them. A delivery truck, somewhere nearby, the sound of pigeons, the smell of someone's breakfast from an open window above. He looked at her face with the direct, undefended attention of someone who has nothing left to perform and knows it. She looked back at him with the same attention she brought. To everything she tried to understand, complete, honest, without the distortion of what she wished were there. "Say what you came to say," she said. He said it. He said it without preamble, without the professional management of language that had characterized everything she had known of him. He said it in the flat, unpolished way of someone who has spent a considerable time alone with a thing and has run out of ways to make it sound better than it is. He said that he had known what Lenora's love was from early on. He said that he had recognized it as genuine because he had encountered enough performances of love and had performed it often enough himself to be able to tell the real thing when it was in front of him. He said that recognizing it and deciding what to do with it were 2 different acts, and that what he had chosen to do with it was to calculate its usefulness and deploy it accordingly. He said that he had known, on some level, he didn't examine too closely, that what he was doing with the real thing was indecent, and that the not examining was itself a choice. He said that the specific cruelty of it was not that he had deceived her. He had deceived many people. He was good at it. It had rarely cost him sleep. The cruelty was that he had looked at something genuine and treated it as a resource. He said, I had something real, and I used it like a transaction. His voice broke on the last word, not dramatically. A small, almost imperceptible fracture in the voice, the kind that happens when a person has been trying to hold something together for a long time and finally sets it down in front of someone who will see it clearly. Lenora stood with her coffee, going cold in her hands, and looked at him and felt the full complexity of what she felt, not love anymore, not the version of it that had existed before, but the ghost of it, the accurate shape of what had been there, before she knew what it had been placed into. She felt the specific grief of a real thing that was genuinely gone. She felt the exhaustion of 3 months of holding herself steady under circumstances that would have broken someone less practiced at holding steady. She felt at the very bottom of it something she hadn't expected, a small, clean, almost involuntary compassion for a man who had looked at real love and not known what to do with it, not because he was incapable of the knowledge, but because he had spent so long treating everything as a transaction that the real thing had arrived, and he had processed it in the only language he had. She didn't say any of that. What she said was, I know. He looked at her. I believe you, she said. I believe that you mean what you're saying right now. And I believe that understanding it now, after everything, is real. She held his gaze steadily. And it doesn't rewrite what happened. It doesn't give back what it cost. It doesn't make a new version of a marriage that should not have existed. She paused. You took something genuine, and you used it. And now you're standing on a street in Florence understanding that. Both of those things are true simultaneously, and they don't cancel each other out. He received that. She could see him, receiving it the specific quality of a man, accepting a verdict because he has no argument left, but because he has decided the argument is not the point. I know, he said. Good. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then go home, Cassian. Yeah, he said. Build what you can, legitimately. You're good at building things, you know that. You've always known it. Use it for something that doesn't require you to use people as materials. He almost smiled. It didn't make it all the way to his face. That's more than I deserve. It's not for you, she said. It's true, and it was worth saying. He nodded. They did not embrace. They did not shake hands. They stood in the cold Florentine morning and looked at each other with the particular honesty of two people who have been through something extreme together and come out the other side of it, not as enemies, not as anything that has a comfortable name, but as two people who know exactly what happened and have decided not to lie about it. Then Cassian Rourke turned and walked back up the cobblestone street, and Lenora watched him till he turned the corner, and then she looked at her cold coffee, and at the studio door, and at the November sky over Florence, which was the specific pale gray of a northern Italian autumn, and she breathed in and out once, slowly. She went to inside. She hung up her coat. She put the cold coffee on the work table and went to make another, because cold coffee was one compromise she no longer felt any obligation to accept. While the water heated, she looked at the panel, painting the crack lure, the old failed repair, the accumulated centuries of pressure held in the surface of the thing. She had been working on it for 3 weeks, and the failing repair was fully removed, now carefully, patiently, with the particular care that very old damage requires when you are extracting what was done badly in order to get at what was done originally. The original crack was visible. It was always going to be visible. That was not the goal, to make the crack invisible. The goal was to stabilize it, to prevent it from spreading, to remove the false repair that was making things worse, and to restore what was original as close to its authentic state as the evidence supported. Not to erase what had happened. To understand it clearly enough to stop it from causing further damage. Marcella came in at 9, unwrapping a scarf from around her neck, setting her bag on the chair by the door, looking at Lenora with the particular assessing look she had been directing at her for 3 months. You look better, Marcella said. I feel better. Did you sleep? A reasonable amount. Marcella looked at the painting. She looked at the work Lenora had done, the careful, systematic progress of 3 weeks of patient, skilled attention. She looked at the crack, the original, now clean, now properly assessed, and ready for the careful stabilization work that would follow. You can still see where it broke, Marcella said. Lenora looked at it. You're supposed to, she said. She opened her notebook. She reviewed her documentation from the previous session, the photographs, the condition, notes, the specific measurements of the crack's extent. She picked up her instrument. She adjusted the task light by 2 degrees to the left, which was the angle that showed the surface most accurately in this stage of the work. She began. Outside, Florence went about its November morning with the unhurried confidence of a city that had been doing this for centuries, the light moving across old stone, the pigeons negotiating the rooftops, the particular smell of coffee and cold air that belonged specifically to this city at this hour of the autumn day. And inside the studio, in the north light that fell through the skylights, with its characteristic and reliable consistency, a woman who had spent 30 years learning to see what was actually there, not what she feared, not what she hoped, not what other people had painted over the original in the years since the damage first occurred, sat at her work table and worked. She worked with both hands steady. She worked with the patience of someone who knew that some things cannot be rushed, that damage carefully treated is different from damage ignored, that the visible crack in a thing that has been properly stabilized is not a flaw but a record evidence of what happened and what survived. She worked, and the morning light held steady, and everything in the room, every instrument, every document, every doc count, every decision belonged entirely, completely, and without condition to her.